big ball. Going for the big shot, and he hits it.
That's batted into the air, intercepted, and the Bears are going to win it.
8 days of training camp practices are in the books for the Chicago Bears. There's a ton of different things to discuss. We're going to be breaking the whole thing down for you. Welcome into the Halas Beat, brought to you by the Bear Report, Usayd, Koshul, and Steve Letizia. Here you can check us out on Twitter at Halas Beat, at CFC Bears, and at Usayd Koshul. Steve, I don't know about you, but I think one of the first episodes you and I did together, we discussed how Luther Burden and Colston Loveland, more specifically Luther Burden, was going to be sort of the Bears' best rookie. And it sounds like through practices 6, 7, and especially practice 8, he's really popped off and has suddenly found a way to, become an effective contributor in Ben Johnson's offense.
Yeah, and it's huge, after, the things with OTAs being out, missing the first couple days of training camp here, and then reports about not being lined up right and getting kicked off the field. It sounds like these last couple days he's really come into his own and really started to establish a presence at training camp, which is just huge because it allows them to do so many different things when the more weapons you have. It allows Usayd to line up just an X wide receiver and kind of do his thing. It allows them to do what they've been doing these last couple of days, move DJ Moore into the backfield and get different looks there. So it's huge, and it's just great to see a young guy like that who maybe faced some adversity early on, not letting it get to him, and just stay in your playbook, stay studying, even if you're not participating, and then take advantage of it once you get on the field. It sounds like that's exactly what he's doing. And for a guy who was billed as a wide receiver 1 going into last season and kind of not experiencing great success last year, again, that's just a really good sign that he kind of is just kind of rolling with the punches, facing adversity, but powering through, and looking really good these past few days. It's still training camp, so we got to temper expectations a little bit, but you definitely would rather see the reports of him getting open and doing well than the opposite. So yeah, definitely positive signs there for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, as cool as it is to see Luther having these really good training camp practices, the big, test is going to be, can he do it against a Minnesota secondary? Can he do it against the Lions secondary, which the Bears are playing in week 2 at this point? I don't even know what the schedule is because I'm so far consumed into training camp. But I also think, the other big thing to really keep in mind here is this kind of goes back to what you and I have been saying, right? Where I guarantee you that if Luther Burden pops off in 2025 and ends up being one of the best offensive rookies in the league, no doubt, then people are going to circle back to the conversation of, well, how did this guy slip to number 39 overall, right? Because that was ultimately when he was drafted. That I think was kind of the big question in terms of, it was almost, I want to say 9 to 10 months of us hearing, well, Luther Burden's a first round pick. Luther Burden's going to be a guy that ends up coming in and contributing right away. For some teams, it was, well, Luther Burden is wide receiver 1. And then all of a sudden you get to the spring and it's like, well, he still was wide receiver 1, slips to the second round. I don't think a lot of people even realize that he was on the board at the end of round 1. And then boom, in comes the Bears taking him at 39th overall. And I think it's so interesting because, you mentioned DJ Moore here. You talked about Rome Odunze as well. This is kind of what the Bears thought they always had with some of their players and some of the previous quarterbacks, but it finally seems like it's coming to fruition where it's like, yeah, we've had Allen Robinson and Anthony Miller and Taylor Gabriel, right? This franchise had that at one point, and we're all sitting there and okay, well, they've overhauled the wide receiver room for one quarterback. And then it was, well, there's Darnell Mooney, but we're also trading for DJ Moore. Not that there was ever any there wasn't much crossover between the two, but it was, well, we have DJ Moore now for Justin Fields, and so everyone was like, this is the best thing on the planet. And now all of a sudden you look at it, and the Bears finally have the 3 legitimate wide receivers that a lot of good teams around the league, if you take, I think, the Bears' 3 receivers, put them up against any receiving core in the league, then there's no doubt in my mind that this is probably one of the better wide receiver groups in the entire league.
Yeah, and I think part of it is the Bears, like you mentioned, kind of the Bears receivers they've had the last decade or so. They've had some talent there, no like game changers, but they've had some talent, but they never really had an offensive coaching staff that could really maximize the talent that they do have. And I think they do finally have that now with Ben Johnson and Declan Doyle and Antoine Randall and all these other, great coaches that we brought in. It's maximizing the talent you do have, and then the Bears also do just have talented receivers finally. But I think it's also, we'll see another thing they've been lacking, and I don't know if we know it yet, but in the past they've lacked a quarterback who can really maximize and take advantage of having three really good wide receivers. I think they have that now too as well. Caleb Williams, the reports around him he's been kind of on the upswing in training camp too. It just sounds like everything's kind of gelling together finally after maybe a slow start for the offense to training camp. And I think by all accounts, that's what it's been. But these last couple of days, Burden's been shining, Loveland's been shining, Caleb Williams has been shining. So it just sounds like, to me, that's just all coaching. We've had talent in the past, but we've never been able to maximize it. And again, still very, very early, but it seems like that is what is happening. And they're throwing a lot out there right now at these guys. So some of the things they're doing right now might not make it into the final, playbook. We might not see it week one or, even during the regular season, but they're finding out what's working, and they're going through this all. And it sounds like they're on the upswing. The offense is on the upswing. It's nice to see, in years past, it was always the defense is winning every day. The offense might show some flashes here, but the defense wins pretty much every day. It does seem like while the defense was winning early in training camp, the offense is winning these last couple of days, which is just really great to see.
I mean, hey, you mentioned some of the receivers' talent. That this team's had talented receivers in the past. Remember Cam Meredith's big catch against the Titans, I think, in that 2017 preseason game, and everyone was just like, all right, well, Mitch Trubisky's the real deal. But there's been a ton of that. But, you bring up a really good point here about the quarterback basically maximizing all the weapons around him. And the other receiver, well, not really receiver, but I guess rookie that's having a really big training camp is Colston Loveland. And again, guys, we'll talk about the defense in a second here, followed by some stuff regarding the left tackle position, because there's a lot of noteworthy updates there. But you talk about Colston Loveland. He, in his first official practice back, I believe it was Monday or Tuesday this week, kind of hit it off with Caleb Williams. It was pretty much, I think it was like a couple touchdowns. It was a lot of really big receptions, a lot of the big situational stuff is where Colston Loveland kind of shine. And so to me, the way that Colston Loveland is excelling is right there on par with what a lot of people expected. And the reason being is see, with these rookies, like 8 training camp practices kind of sucks in a sense, because we're constantly projecting what they can turn into, but we're always going back to, well, this is what they did in college, or this is where these guys were drafted. And I mean, again, I know that you and I had interacted briefly on Twitter throughout the pre-draft process, but I think it was interesting to where, a lot of people, Bears fans specifically, were first on the Tyler Warren train. Like, it's going to be a tight end. It has to be a Tyler Warren. And then you see some of these videos that are circulating from Colts camp where who knows what Tyler Warren is doing, but then simultaneously you see, oh my God, look at Coulson Loveland having 2 touchdowns on the day, including a 20-yard reception, I think is what he had in the red zone. And then it's just like, well, Coulson Loveland, Ryan Poles got it correct, and we now have a really good tight end. But I think the reality of it really is this, is it's like Caleb Williams is proving to us that he's making use of the veteran weapons he has, like a Moore and a Rome Odunze, and then some of the younger weapons as well are going to come in and contribute specifically because of him.
Yeah, seeing him, the first round pick come in right away and kind of show why he was, a top 10 selection is just so amazing. I mean, how many times have the Bears drafted a guy in the first round and training camp comes around and you never hear from him? You don't really hear much of him. And then you say, well, it's still early. He's still learning. And then it ends up being a bust. I feel like the Bears, we never really see these positive reports from the Bears high draft picks, or rarely see it. So it's really nice to see that early on. He's still got a long way to go. Obviously, we're talking about 8 practices here, but it's very, very encouraging sign to see. The reports that Cole Kmet was kind of playing a lot with the twos. I don't know if that's going to be, what eventually happens, but it's just nice to see Coulson Loveland kind of coming in and seamlessly being that receiving threat. I really liked what I've seen, just watching camp videos as a blocker as well. That's really encouraging too. There was that one play where it was the Caleb Williams read option, and Loveland was just coming across the formation, pulling and getting out in front in space. And I don't know who he was blocking. It was a cornerback, but it was a smaller defender, and he had no problem, reaching him and making sure that he didn't, get around him or anything. So it was a really nice block. That's really encouraging to see as well. Just, kind of the all-around game that you get with a guy like Colston Loveland. And yeah, him being a viable receiving threat or a viable, offensive weapon in a variety of different ways is just, again, I just say this a lot, but it just opens up the offense so much. And I think that's another reason why you're seeing DJ Moore line up in the backfield, because they want to get Cole Kmet on the field. They want to get Colston Loveland on the field. They want to get Lether Burden on the field. Olamide Zaccheaus is he's flashing in camp too. He's a vet, but you want to get, if he's doing well, he's a quality third receiver. You want to get him on the field as well. So just having all these weapons just allows you to be very creative with how you utilize some of these guys, and it's just it gives defenses so many different looks, so many things they have to worry about, so many things they have to practice against. Leading up in the week leading up to the game, they have to practice about having DJ Moore in the back of the field. They have to practice to defend different looks, and that just makes it harder for them to really finalize a game plan against you. So this is all just really encouraging so far. I told myself I wouldn't get my hopes up too much, coming into this year, but it's happening again. We'll see. But I think the early signs have been just very, very good about this draft class. And we're just talking about the first 2 guys they've drafted. Other guys have been pretty good too.
So I'm going to be honest with you here, dude. So here's the deal. The last couple of years, because again, for our listeners that know, there's always a certain set of training camp practices I'm not able to go to. And it's because it's I can't be in 2 places at once. So I'm either at my own football practices or I'm at the Bears practices, right? But I will go ahead and say this, that you can't really put, I feel too much stock into these 10 to 15 second clips that are floating around on social media. So it's always good to hear what some of the coaches and the players themselves have to go and say. And you look at Colston Loveland, he's drawing a ton of praise from some of the vets in the room, as well as Ben Johnson. I know the other day, when Tremaine Edmonds was speaking, I think it was a Wednesday, someone was like, well, you have to understand that with Colston Loveland, he's a bigger guy. He can certainly move in space. I will say this, that when we go back to look at Colston Loveland's college tape, because Michigan was such a run-heavy offense, he had to block more than he probably should have. I think there's no doubt in my mind that if Colston Loveland was catching passes 6, 7, 8 times a game at Michigan, then he's probably the consensus number 1 tight end, and everyone's looking at Tyler Warren and saying, well, he has some work to do as a receiver, which, by the way, the Bears graded Loveland and Warren out similarly, but they felt as if Loveland was a better fit. But, you're right. It is encouraging to see all this. Can't put too much stock into training camp because they're actually going to have to perform on the year or throughout the season. Ben Johnson this morning had kind of mentioned that Cole Kmet's a unicorn. He can do a couple different things here. So, to me, look at this whole concept of 12 personnel. I'm not looking at the Bears are going to trot out either Colston Loveland or Cole Kmet. It's going to be, can those two kind of simultaneously exist together? And yes, I've been the one to publicly say maybe Cole Kmet's not going to be here next year. But if this thing goes as planned and the Bears really find their niche with 12 personnel, there's no reason to think that you can't have 2 good tight ends on the roster, which goes back to the point that you made about how it seems as if the coaching staff plus the quarterback is finally figuring out how to use all these weapons.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. You don't want to get too excited about training camp practices, but you also would much rather have this than the opposite. where, we're on here saying, well, it's too early to form any judgments. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves. I'd much rather be having the conversation of we need to temper expectations than trying to, get excited about it later in the training camp or later in the preseason. So it's all good so far. Another thing you mentioned about, we don't exactly know what's happening here and on some of these plays. Even, you see the videos that people are posting, which are great. Continue to do it, even though the Bears hate it. But it's great to see all that stuff. But we don't exactly know what each play is, what they're working on. It's just impossible to tell. One example was, there was I don't know, I think this was a few days ago, but, it was a report that Montez Sweat got, a pressure, and then Montez Sweat back-to-back pressures on two different plays. And then everybody was like, oh, the offensive line looks bad. What's going on? And then either Declan Doyle or Ben Johnson said, oh, actually, that was by design. We were trying to, dial up some pressures on Caleb Williams to see how he reacts, just throw different looks at him. So stuff like that. We don't exactly know what's happening. Even if the beat reporters are tweeting something, we don't know exactly what they're working on. So that's another reason just to, temper expectations a little bit, because they're working on a lot of different things and we don't exactly know what's going on. But again, I'd still rather be, optimistic at this point than pessimistic.
Yeah, and I will admit this, is that if you remember the Stumble Bum, the play that Ben Johnson pulled off when he was OC of the Lions against the Bears last season at Soldier Field, I mean, when the media is not there, that's when, and it's completely closed in private practice, that is when this team is kind of working on Stumble Bum, on plays like Stumble Bum and all the trick plays. But you mentioned the defense earlier in Montez Sweat. I think this is a good time to start mentioning that this defense, I feel as if, is really buying into the culture that Dennis Allen has created, where the first couple days of training camp, it was kind of Deshaun Wright's doing up downs as an introductory sort of ritual to the team. Then TJ Edwards is coming out and saying, well, doing the up downs took me back to middle school or high school, which where TJ Edwards went to high school, I can promise you right now, they did a ridiculous amount of up downs from what I know. All right. And up downs, I feel like, are the one thing that you never necessarily forget when you are younger, especially when you're at the high school level. But now all of a sudden, that was what it was the first couple days. But now I think the narrative has really changed to, hey, yeah, we're doing up downs, and Dennis Allen's trying to establish a sense of accountability to, we trust what this coaching staff is going to do, and we're going to allow this coaching staff to make plays. But then the other part of it is this too, is that this defense seems to be a lot more open-minded to some of the week-to-week changes that we're going to end up seeing in terms of the different packages. Like, I remember in the past, Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards kind of talking about how, well, if you're going to be a good defense, you have to be on your P's and Q's, and to me, that was just a stupid saying. But now it's kind of just like, hey, if we want to be a good defense, we're going to have to adapt. We're going to have to trust the D coordinator. We're going to have to get a little bit more versatile, which means that this unit's rallied behind Dennis Allen completely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really good to see everything that we've been hearing from the defense. I think Ben Johnson said, that they're really making life miserable for the offense because throwing a lot of different looks at them and everything like that. And I mean, Dennis Allen is one of the best defensive coordinators in football. He's definitely up there in that conversation. So having him, and having him on your team just by himself is great. Is just great to have. But then when you hear all the defenders kind of buying into everything that he's saying, doing those up downs, it's hard to, when you're doing those up, you're defensive players, you're pro athletes making millions and millions of dollars, and your coach still has you doing up downs that, like you said, you do in high school, you do in middle school. That's what you do. So the fact that they're doing that, not only doing it, but they're doing it and excited about it, really just is really good to see. And I like everything he said. I saw one thing with moving Kyler Gordon around. Kyle Gordon playing nickel, he's playing outside, playing some free safety as well. And I think that's just a really good way to maximize him. The Bears tried to kind of do that when he was a rookie, play him outside and inside at least. And I don't think it really went well. And then he kind of found his home kind of just at the nickel position with Kyler Gordon. But now he's been in the league for a few years. He's a veteran now. And I think Dennis Allen, wants to maximize him. So moving him around a lot is really good. I like what he said about the QB2 position, how it's just a wide open race right now. And it does seem like Nahshon Wright maybe has the leg up at this point because he's played really well over maybe a Tyreek Stevenson. But just the competition he's brought and just the mentality he's brought, I think is going to really help them. And it's going to help the offense too, because, the offense, I know we're talking about the defense. I don't want to talk too much about the offense because I think sometimes everyone gets a little bit too offense heavy when talking about the Bears, but they're going up against one of the better defensive coordinators in football in practice everywhere. That's really going to help them when they get to the regular season and go up probably against lesser defensive coordinators, at least, half the games in the regular season. So it's really good to see.
Yeah, and this is a unit too that is really figuring out its identity as well, because if we're being honest, the tough part about this defense is that it's a much older unit compared to some of the units we've seen in the past, where it's like Montez Sweat's in his mid-20s, Grady Jarrett being 30-something. Then you've got Tremaine Edmonds, TJ Edwards, Kevin Byard, Jaquan Brisker, which it's good. It's been really good to see Jaquan Brisker being fully healthy as well. But you hope he makes it through the regular season. I will also say this, Ben Johnson did say today, Thursday morning, there's a scenario to where Jalen Johnson's ready to go for week 1, which to me, it really leads me to believe the fact that it's like the timeline of this whole thing from Jalen Johnson's ready to go and he'll be good for camp. But then it turned into, we were all expecting him to be good for camp. Then it turned into he's on the NFI list, but the rehab's isn't going well. He injured his leg training this offseason. And then all of a sudden now kind of what's happened is that Ben Johnson says he should be ready for week 1, but it could be coach speak at this point. I really think the Bears are doing what they've always done, which is just covering up this injury. And my fear, and this is just speculation on my part, by the way, that it is worse than a lot of people are probably publicly admitting at this point, and that if we do get to August, let's say, in the final wave of roster cuts, and we are in game week come September 1st, that all of a sudden, things are going to go from, hey, it was really good to, and he's going to be ready to go, to now Jalen Johnson still rehabbing is nowhere to be found.
Yeah, for all the positive things that have come out of this camp, that's definitely the most concerning, without a doubt. Like you said, it's just the fact that the trajectory has changed so quickly over 8 days, 10 days into this, and it's changed 3 times already. And when he's going to be back, now they're saying the target is week 1. We're a couple days away from saying the target is week 4. So yeah, I think that is that is definitely concerning. And I do think I don't know if covering it up is the right word, but they're definitely not telling us the whole truth about kind of what's happening there. So that is very, very concerning to hear. And this defense, I think they have some talent. I've gushed about Dennis Allen, obviously, just 5 minutes ago, but this defense looks a lot different without Jalen Johnson on it. It's going to be tough for them to, even if he's out 2-3 weeks to start the year, that's going to be really tough for them. There's a lot of question. I like the depth that they have at cornerback, but without Jalen Johnson, everyone has to bump up one. So you're talking about Tyreek Stevens and Nahshon Wright, cornerback 1. I don't like that at all. And then both those guys are going to probably be on the field. Kyler Gordon's, great. But that defense could fall apart very quickly if you don't have Jalen Johnson on there. So that is definitely a huge concern that hopefully we get some clarity on, in these next couple days, next week or so. We're 10 days out from the first preseason game. So hopefully at least before then we get some clarity on what his timeline actually is. And hopefully, hopefully it's nothing serious and they're just being overly cautious, and hopefully he is back week 1, but things could get scary without Jalen Johnson on this defense.
It's something you kind of hold your breath for, but the left tackle position, dude, is one of it should be one of the more talked about storylines. Okay, so I don't even know how to phrase this, but I kind of went into training camp thinking that so many people were going to treat the left tackle competition like the kicker competition from 2019, which, let's be honest, is a pretty intense thing. But I guess the talk around that has simmered down just a bit, and now it's no longer left tackle, because the Bears are letting this process play out, but it still, to me, should be more talked about in terms of everything, because they've done what we expected them to do. The Bears have come in, they've alternated 3 different left tackles at this point in Jones, Trapilo, and Amagaji. They've each gotten reps with the first team. I know from Wednesday's practice, Trapilo and Amagaji did get reps with the ones, which was really good to see. But you also ultimately kind of wonder here where maybe the dust is starting to settle a bit, because Ben Johnson did say today, well, we're really looking to see who makes the least amount of mental mistakes and mental errors as we sort of figure this thing out.
Yeah, it's definitely it's probably, I mean, I think the only really open starting position on either side of the ball, that's still kind of like up for grabs. Everything else is pretty, for the most part, at least dialed in. So yeah, it's definitely what I'm looking at the most. And it is interesting how they've juggled it, with the 3 guys. It does seem to me like, even though all 3 guys are rotating it in, just from everything they've said and just from who's getting more reps, it does seem like it's a kind of more of like a 2-man race between Jones and Trapilo. And Trapilo's getting a lot more first team reps than I thought he would when at the start of training camp when Jones was kind of full to go. They're still kind of ramping him up a little bit. So I think next week it'll be interesting to see kind of what the disbursement of reps is. But it doesn't sound, it's hard to tell in training camp, in these training camp practices to evaluate the offensive line, until, I know we've had pads on these last couple of days, but until you really get to those joint practices where you have a guy going against you're not going up against every single day, and you get into the preseason games where you're going up against guys who are trying to fight for a roster spot. Until you really get into those games, I don't know how much we're really going to know about the direction. I do like, what you said and what Ben Johnson said about, who's going to make the fewest mental mistakes, because we've seen false starts and holding penalties and everything just derail drives, over the last 20 years of my life with Bears offensive linemen. So I like the fact that they're trying to get some consistency there. But yeah, I really don't know who's going to really come out on top here. If I had to guess right now, I'm still going to lean Braxton Jones. But I'm curious kind of what you think. If week 1 was this Sunday, who do you think would be the starting left tackle?
All right, so I love the fact that you asked me this question now. Okay, best case scenario is that all 3 of them are healthy and you have a really tough decision to make. I will say this, though. If you're running 12 personnel and you are, or not even if you're running 12 personnel, if the foundation of your offense is going to be a 12 personnel and that's kind of what you're going to build this thing around, then give me Ozzy Trapilo. And I know he's not the most popular pick, but it's like, you don't spend a 2nd-round pick on a 6'8" lineman and sit him on the bench, right? Like that just doesn't make sense to me. Which I should note, the extra tight end is going to act as a extra blocker in a sense, even just chipping and then getting out into space as sort of the check down route. Because the reality of it is this, is, people are going to be concerned that, okay, well, if you go Ozzy Trapilo, then the issue is that why are you starting a rookie left tackle? Well, the answer is this. You have a really detailed head coach, a pretty detailed offensive coordinator, 2 guys that are pretty intense. So they're going to go ahead. They're going to make sure that they are not dealing with Ozzy Trapilo basically being left on an island by himself. I would definitely go and take Ozzy Trapilo in this scenario, just because it's like I said, he is the future at this point. With Braxton Jones, you're kind of looking at him and saying, well, as good as he is, this is kind of who he is at this point, where, he's this solid pass protector, really good run blocker, I should say. I think he's a better run blocker than he is pass protector, but it just makes more sense to go ahead and to have a guy like Braxton Jones basically become a free agent after this year in order to go ahead and allow Ozzy Trapilo to get those reps. Because if you're the Bears right now, you're kind of building this thing out, not with just 2025 in mind, but 2026, 27, and 28 as well. And, every time that we've heard Ozzy Trapilo, it's been nothing but good reviews about him. Every single time we've heard Braxton Jones, it's always been good stuff from him too. But I think Ben Johnson's comment back in the spring about, well, he does have to play with a better anchor was pretty noteworthy. And I don't necessarily think that that's something that's kind of shine on tape here throughout this camp.
Yeah, and that's something that's hard to fix. He's going into his third. He's going into his third year as a pro. We've been saying we've been saying you got to fix your anchor since he was drafted. So it's something where if he hasn't fixed it by now, he might just be not capable of fixing it and just kind of who he is. But I like we said about the offense, being in more 12 personnel or running out of a base 12 personnel offense, because I think that does help the offensive lineman tremendously. We've seen in the past, just last year, 2 years with Luke Getzky and Shane Waldron, just how predictable the Bears offense was. You knew, when they were passing, you knew they were running. When they were running, they were sloppy. They had false starts and stuff. They were constantly faced with third and long. So the defense was just kind of able to pin their ears back and go. And I think Braxton Jones, for all of his warts that he certainly has, he performed okay in a not good environment because just of how predictable it was. So I think if you put him in a Ben Johnson offense that's hopefully not as predictable, hopefully, he gets a little protection from some tight ends and stuff, hopefully, your run game is a little bit better than it has been in the past. I think it makes that left tackle job, no matter who it is, Braxton Jones, Ozzie Trapillo, Amagaji, no matter who it is, makes their job a little bit easier than maybe the job of the Bears left tackle has been the last couple of years because, like I said, it's just not going to be as predictable. Hopefully not facing as many third and longs where the defense knows you're going to have to hit a 5 or 7 step drop. And it just kind of, like I said, allows them to pin their ears back and go. So hopefully you face less of those situations and it just makes that offensive tackle jobs easier. But yeah, with Trapillo, I think it was Joe Tooney said as well, just talking to him, when Joe Tooney said that talking to Trapillo, he sounds like a vet just based on, how intelligent he is and, the things that he can pick up on in the O-line, in the O-line rooms when they're looking at film and stuff. So that's really encouraging to see. And I really don't think you can I really don't think there's a right or wrong answer at this point. I think there are pros and cons with Jones and there are pros and cons with Trapillo. So it's tough to say, but I think, like I said, I think we'll have a better idea after, the first couple preseason games, kind of where they're leaning.
We certainly will, and so that's why, this is the first sort of full week of camp. Last week, I think it was week 0. This week is week 1 of camp, but next week's going to be week 2 of camp. So, week 2 is usually where a lot of teams and players really ramp things up here, and you usually see individuals sort of start to separate themselves from the pack. So that's why, things like Luther Burden and Colston Loveland, they're good performances this week. You really hope that they're not just one-hit wonders, which I don't think they will be, and that they can carry it into next year. Same thing with the left tackle position, hoping that, by the second, third, and fourth week of camp, the Bears have more of a structured plan in place for how they kind of want to handle this whole thing. And then, as we always say, hopefully the defense continues to perform at a high level. Before we get out of here, make sure you are following us on Twitter at CFC Bears, at Usayd, Koshul, and at Halas Beat. Make sure to check us out on the Bear Report website as well. If you're listening to the podcast, guys, give us a 5-star rating and review. If you are listening to and watching us on YouTube, would appreciate a like, comment, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If there's anything you want us to go ahead and discuss, leave it in the comments below. We'll for sure revisit those to try to go ahead and get some of your discussion points and incorporate them into our conversations. All right, other than that, ladies and gentlemen, bear down. Have a great week. Have a great rest of your weekend. If you're wondering, the Bears are off Friday and back Saturday, so we'll be back next week with even more content, but until then, bear down.